Right now, your thumb knows what to do before your brain does. You reach for your phone. You unlock it. You scroll. You don't even remember deciding to. But the real answer for why you do this is far stranger than habit or addiction. It goes back over 100,000 years, to a species sitting in the dark with nothing to look at but fire. Somewhere in a small West African apartment, two teenagers lie shoulder to shoulder on a bed, phones inches from their faces, saying almost nothing. Not because they're bored of each other. Because the scrolling has become the shared activity itself. Multiply that scene by billions, every night, all over the planet, and you start to see something that looks less like a bad habit and more like a ritual with the wrong ingredients. Think about the last time you were truly bored. No phone. No screen. Just you and a few empty minutes. It probably felt unbearable. You probably reached for something to fill it. But your ancestors had thousands of empty minutes every single day, and they didn't fill them the way you do. They filled them in ways that built the very brain you're using right now. For most of human history, the sun set and the working day ended. There was no artificial light to extend it. No task list. No notifications. Just firelight, a handful of people, and hours of unstructured time. What did they do with it? The anthropologist Polly Wiesner spent years living among the Jews/Hoansi people of the Kalahari Desert, one of the last groups to still gather daily around fire the way humans did for millennia. She recorded what people talked about during the day versus at night, and the difference was staggering. During daylight, conversation was practical. Complaints. Coordination. Who did what wrong? But at night, around the fire, the subject changed completely. People told stories. Long ones. About distant relatives, ancestors, myths, jokes, journeys. Nearly all of it was social, imaginative, or spiritual. Almost none of it was complaint or gossip. Why would the same people talk so differently depending on the light? Wiesner's answer was simple. Darkness removed the distractions of work and turned attention inward, toward each other. Firelight became a stage. And storytelling around that fire wasn't just entertainment. It was how values traveled from one generation to the next, how strangers became known to each other, how a scattered group remembered it was one people. You call this bonding. Your ancestors called it survival. Firelight also does something to a human face that daylight doesn't. It softens the edges. It hides small imperfections and highlights expression instead. Around a fire, everyone is a little more visible and a little more forgiving at the same time. Compare that to the light of a phone screen, which does the opposite. It sharpens every flaw for a camera and flattens the person on the other end into a feed of strangers you'll never sit across from. The light has changed shape, and so is what it does to the people gathered inside it. There's another detail worth sitting with. The stories Wiesner recorded weren't performances for an audience of one. They were communal, interruptible, full of back and forth. Someone would start a story about a hunt gone wrong, and someone else would jump in with their own version, correcting a detail, adding a joke, extending the myth a little further than it had gone the night before. No single person owned the story. The group did. Compare that to a video you watch alone at 1 a.m., made by someone you'll never meet, edited to remove every pause and imperfection. One is a story built by many hands. The other is a message from one stranger to a million strangers, none of whom can answer back. Here's the part most people never think about. Boredom, for early humans, wasn't a problem to be solved. It was a doorway. Idle time triggered what neuroscientists now call the default mode network, the part of your brain that activates precisely when you're not focused on a task. It's responsible for memory consolidation, imagination, and something we rarely name directly, the sense of self. Your ancestors spent hours a day in that state. You spend almost none. That inward state matters more than it sounds. When your default mode network activates, you're not doing nothing. You're stitching together scattered experiences into a coherent story about who you are. You're rehearsing conversations that haven't happened yet. You're grieving things you haven't fully processed. Some of your best ideas, the ones that feel like they arrive from nowhere, are actually the product of this network quietly working while you thought you were doing nothing at all. Interrupt it constantly, the way a notification does, and it never gets to finish a single thought. Consider what else filled the gaps. Grooming, for one. Not just hygiene. The primatologist Robin Dunbar spent decades studying primate social behavior and found that grooming wasn't only about removing parasites. It was a slow, physical act of trust building, one that released endorphins and cemented alliances. Chimpanzees groom for hours daily. Early humans likely did too, until group sizes grew too large for touch alone to hold everyone together. Dunbar's research suggests that's precisely when language evolved. Talking became the new grooming. Gossip became social glue. You could groom 10 people at once with your voice instead of one at a time with your hands. Isn't it strange that your group chats might be doing the exact same job? Dunbar took this further. He proposed a now famous number, roughly 150, as the upper limit of relationships a human brain can meaningfully maintain, the number of people you could plausibly ask for a favor and expect a personal answer. Beyond that, names blur into categories. Faces become friend of a friend. And here's the uncomfortable part. Your phone hasn't raised that number. It has just given you the illusion of maintaining thousands of connections while your actual capacity for closeness stays exactly where it was on the savannah. You can like 1,000 posts in an evening. You can only truly groom, in Dunbar's sense, a small circle of people who would show up if something went wrong. Then there was fire itself. Not just for warmth or cooking, though both mattered enormously. The primatologist and evolutionary biologist Richard Wrangham argued that cooked food changed the trajectory of the human brain, giving early humans more usable calories with less digestive effort, freeing up energy for a larger, hungrier organ, the brain itself. But fire did something else too. It extended the day. It created a circle. Everyone faced inward, faces lit, bodies still. There was nowhere to be but here. Nothing to check. Nothing to miss. Now compare that to your evening. You probably also sit in a small circle of light. Except it's a screen, and instead of facing each other, you face outward, alone, toward thousands of strangers competing for your attention. The urge to gather in the glow hasn't gone anywhere. Only the glow has changed, and so is who's speaking into it. Wrangham's cooking hypothesis has a quieter implication too. Cooking takes time. It requires someone to tend a flame, wait, watch, and stay put. That waiting wasn't wasted. It became the container for everything else, the conversation, the grooming, the storytelling, the staring into embers with nothing in particular in mind. Modern convenience has removed almost all of that waiting. Food arrives fast. Light arrives instantly. And with the waiting gone, so is the space that waiting used to hold open. Here's the counterintuitive twist. You might assume evolution built you for constant stimulation, given how easily you fall into infinite scrolling. But the opposite is true. Your brain evolved for long stretches of understimulation, broken occasionally by intense bursts of activity, a hunt, a storm, a birth, a death. Boredom wasn't a bug in that system. It was the resting state the whole system was built around. What you call wasting time was, for most of human history, the time your brain used to process everything else. Modern life has quietly deleted that resting state. Every idle moment now gets filled before it can even register as idle. Standing in line? Phone out. Waiting for the kettle? Phone out. The gap that used to trigger memory consolidation, imagination, self-reflection, even boredom-driven creativity, gets closed within seconds. Some researchers now suspect this constant filling is why so many people report feeling simultaneously overstimulated and understimulated. You're flooded with input, but starved of the kind of unstructured mental space your ancestors had by default. There's a particularly telling detail in Wiesner's fire research. She found that during the day, when people were busy and productive, almost no one told stories. Stories only bloomed at night, in the waste of unproductive hours. If you'd asked the Kalahari forager to justify sitting around a fire for 4 hours doing nothing but talking, they might not have had an answer beyond, "This is when we become people together." There was no metric for it. No output. Just presence. You still crave that. It's why silence in a group can feel awkward, why a slow evening with close friends and no plan can feel more nourishing than a packed one. It's why campfires still pull people in today, even with nothing to cook and nowhere to be. Something ancient in you recognizes the shape of that gathering, even if you can't name why. Think about the last party you went to where someone lit a fire pit in the backyard. Notice how conversation slows down near it. Notice how people who were checking their phones a minute earlier suddenly aren't. No one tells them to put the phone away. The fire does it for them, the same way it's been doing it for a few 100,000 years. That's not nostalgia. That's a very old piece of software finally finding hardware it recognizes. And this is where it gets uncomfortable, if you're honest with yourself. The scrolling isn't really the problem. The problem is what scrolling replaced. It replaced the fire, the circle, the slow unfolding of a story that everyone gets to add to. It offered something that looks similar from a distance, faces lit by a glow, attention held for hours, but delivers almost none of what the original ritual was built to provide. You get the light without the warmth. The stimulation without the story. The company of a million strangers instead of the company of the dozen people who would actually notice if you disappeared. So what did prehistoric humans actually do instead of scrolling? They groomed each other by hand, then later by voice. They told stories that carried a culture's entire memory across generations. They sat in circles of firelight and let their minds wander into myth, humor, grief, and speculation. They let boredom happen, because boredom was doing something important, quietly, in the background, the way your phone does something quiet and important in the background of your evenings now. The tools have changed almost beyond recognition. The need underneath them hasn't moved an inch. You still want the circle. You still want the fire. You still want a voice telling you something true in the dark. Tonight, when your thumb reaches for your phone before your brain is caught up, you'll be doing something your ancestors would recognize instantly, just aimed at the wrong kind of fire.